Hello and welcome to Crossing the 49, a cross-border tax and financial planning podcast. I'm your host, Phil Hogan, and today we're going to talk about why it's really important to get some good advice before moving to Canada. Okay, on the way to the office from beautiful Mill Bay, raining in Victoria right now, I thought this would be a good opportunity just to chat a little bit about why it's really important to get some advice before moving to Canada. So I would say the majority of our clients, or our new clients anyways, that we speak to on a weekly basis are those that are moving to Canada or returning to Canada. So often you might have a dual citizen spouse with an American spouse moving back to Canada. And one of the issues that we find is if we're speaking to these individuals after they've already moved, so let's say, a couple moves to Canada in June of 2023, and they call us up in the fall of 2023, and they mention, we've moved to Canada, we have some investments down there, we might have a business, we have some RSPs up here, this is our situation, and we're thinking, and we need some help on the tax and investment side. The challenge with this is a lot of the strategies that we would employ for clients before they move to Canada will not be available to us. So, and we're not going to get into a deep dive today, but when you move to Canada and you set up residency, that's really when your tax your tax residency starts. So if you moved to Canada on June 30th, you would be taxable on your income from June 30th to the end of the year. In Canada, for U.S. purposes, you would be taxable for the whole year on your income. And the reason that's important is because once you have that residency date, there's lots of tax planning and investment planning strategies that are just not available to us. So let's run through some of those today. So one example might be, one strategy we use quite a bit that can save a significant amount of future Canadian tax would be Roth IRA conversions. And this is not always possible, but we do this a lot. And in cases where a client's income might be quite low before they enter Canada, there's a huge opportunity to convert some of their IRA to a Roth IRA that will eventually be withdrawn tax-free in Canada. So let's pick some numbers. Let's say you had $100,000 that you could convert from your IRA to a Roth IRA. If you move to Canada and you don't do that conversion, and let's assume, going forward, your tax rate in Canada will be 30%. And let's assume before you enter Canada, your U.S. tax rate is 15%. So if you did nothing and you moved to Canada with a $100,000 IRA, and eventually that IRA gets withdrawn through required minimum distributions, or you just pull money out of the IRA, you're going to pay 30% tax on that IRA. So you'll pay $30,000 in tax. If, let's say, you're doing some planning before you move to Canada and you convert some of that, or let's say you convert the whole $100,000 IRA to a Roth IRA, and because your rate in the U.S. before you become a Canadian resident is 15%, you'll pay $15,000 of tax. So essentially, by doing the conversion, because in the future, once that money's pulled out of the Roth in Canada, you won't pay tax on any of the Roth because it's a tax-free vehicle, even the income that's earned within the Roth. So that's a pure 15%, or 15%, but also $15,000 tax saving on that conversion. So that can often be maybe a 20 minute conversation that saves $15,000. So that's a good example of like the reason why you want to sit down and chat with somebody, because we do these conversions all the time. And that's a huge save. Not only are you saving the 15%, but you're saving tax on all the accumulated income, especially because these Roths can be distributed to non-spouse beneficiaries and then continue to compound tax-free. So really powerful, lots of crazy tax savings. I mean, there have been cases where we've saved tens and tens of thousands of dollars for clients by just doing these Roth conversions. So that's one example. Another example might be in the U.S., revocable trusts are quite popular. They were quite popular because of estate planning strategies. I mean, the estate planning exemption is quite high now. It's well over $10 million. So probably, being used less, but still very, very popular. The problem with revocable trusts in Canada, unlike the US, and once again, we're not going to dive too deep here today, but revocable trusts for US purposes, are essentially a flow through. So if you stuff all your US investment portfolio assets into a revocable trust, any income they earn, any capital gains is going to be taxable to you, flow through right onto your tax return. For Canadian purposes, we don't really have, flow through, revocable trusts. So essentially that trust is going to be a Canadian, assuming you're the trustee. That's going to become a Canadian trust when you enter Canada to become a Canadian tax resident, which is likely not something you're going to want. It'll be a lot more tax compliance for you, both on the Canadian and on the US side, and it likely won't add very much value. So once again, I'm not saying these never work. In most cases they don't, and you want to talk to your tax CPA, your lawyer. There might be some reasons to keep these trusts, but in a lot of cases they're not adding a lot of value, and they're adding lots of additional tax complexity and sometimes double tax. So look out for the revocable trust. Another thing we see, and once again, the reason this is important to plan before you enter Canada is because once you enter, you're going to have these tax filing requirements anyways, and you're going to have to wind up the trust. So doing things beforehand is going to be a lot easier. One big one we see, very common for clients that have shares of US LLCs. So a lot of clients, they will run their business through US LLCs, which can work great from a US perspective. In most cases, unless you elect these LLCs to be corps, you have liability protection, and the income flows directly to you from the business to your personal tax return. Easy to set up. Now, the problem with on the Canadian side is once you become a Canadian resident, that LLC is considered a corporation, which means that the income does not flow to you automatically on your tax return. It does on the US tax return, but it doesn't for Canadian purposes. So once again, we're not going to dive too deep today, but there's a potential for quite a bit of double taxation by having LLC assets as a Canadian resident. And you will likely have T1134 filing requirements, which is another compliance form for foreign affiliates. And if you've ever seen that form, it will make even seasoned tax CPA's head spin. So whenever you can avoid that T1135 form, I would avoid it. So those are just a couple examples of why you want to plan. I mean, there's many more. Really important. If you're thinking about moving to Canada, if you're thinking about returning to Canada, I would reach out Phil at philhogan.com. And I can walk you through some of your options. We can, find some people to help and sit down, and really work through what some of the strategies might be before you enter. Because a lot of times we're working with clients where, they might be entering next year. They might be entering within, 3 months. And even, I get this question a lot, how long do I need to plan for this, before moving back? In most cases, unless the situation is really complex and we're winding up trusts, we're winding up companies, 3 to 4 months is plenty of time to sit down, do a good plan, look at all the investments. In most cases, we're transferring most of the investments to Canada, assuming it's a permanent move. So 3 to 4 months planning is probably enough time. So hopefully that was helpful. Once again, if you need help with any of this, Phil at philhogan.com, and we'll see you on the next one.